Join me as I explore this creepy abandoned doctor's house and try to uncover what's hiding inside. As I step out of my car and approach the old doctor's house, I can't help but feel a chill run down my spine. The once white walls are now weathered and worn, the windows are boarded up, and the front door hangs crookedly on its hinges. It's as if time has stood still here, preserving a piece of the past that's just begging to be uncovered. What secrets lie hidden within these crumbling walls? What drove the doctor away, leaving behind a lifetime of memories and possessions? Was it a sudden departure or a gradual decline into oblivion? So many questions swirl through my mind as I stand before this eerie, abandoned doctor's house. As I delve deeper into the mystery, I find myself wondering what kind of person the doctor was. Was he a kind and compassionate soul, or a reclusive and eccentric figure? Did he have a family? Or was he alone? And what about his patients? Did they come to him seeking solace and healing, or did they flee in fear? The more I ponder these questions, the more I'm drawn to the house, as if it's beckoning me to uncover its secrets. I can almost hear the whispers of the past urging me to explore every nook and cranny, to unearth the truth that lies hidden beneath the surface. As I step inside, a musty smell hits me, and the creaking of the old wooden floorboards beneath my feet seems to echo through the empty halls. It's as if the house itself is watching me, waiting to see if I'll uncover its secrets or leave them forever buried. First thing that catches my eye is an old medical table, its surface worn and scratched. I can almost imagine the countless patients who lay on this very table, their hearts racing with fear or hopes of recovery. Next to it stands a rusty old autoclave, its metal bellows still intact. What kind of procedures did the doctor perform here? As I make my way through the house, I stumble upon a room filled with old medical equipment, each piece more fascinating than the last. There's an ancient EKG machine, its wires tangled and frayed, and a vintage dental chair, its leather upholstery cracked and worn. It's like stepping into a time capsule, a world where medicine was still in its infancy. One piece in particular catches my eye, an old doctor's bag, its leather worn and creased. I can almost imagine the doctor carrying this very bag on his rounds, visiting patients in their homes and bringing hope and healing to those in need. But as I delve deeper into the house, I stumble upon something that makes my blood run cold. A hidden room tucked away behind a false wall contains a disturbing discovery. Among the cobwebs and dust, I find a diary belonging to the doctor. Its pages filled with cryptic entries and haunting sketches. As I flip through the pages, a chill runs down my spine. The doctor's writings speak of darkness and despair, but descent into madness that's both captivating and terrifying. It's as if I'm reading the private thoughts of a man on the brink of insanity. The more I read, the more questions I have. What drove the doctor to this point? Was it the weight of his responsibilities, or some deep-seated fear? And what about his patients? Did they suffer at his hands, or were they simply pawns in his game of madness? As I finish reading the diary, I'm left with more questions than answers. But one thing's for sure, this abandoned doctor's house holds secrets far more sinister than I ever could have imagined. As I wrap up my exploration, left to ponder the mysteries that linger within these crumbling walls. The doctor's story may never be fully known, but one thing's for sure, this house will haunt me for a long time to come. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the heart of madness. If you have any theories about the doctor's house, or if you'd like to share your own creepy exploration stories, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more exploration videos, and who knows, maybe our next adventure will uncover even more secrets hiding in the shadows.
Part 1: The House on Ashwood Avenue. As I stepped out of the car and stared at the crumbling remains of Dr. Soren's house, a chill seeped through the autumn air, settling deep in my bones. The once white walls of the house, weathered by time and neglect, seemed to sag under an invisible weight. Old boards haphazardly crossed the windows, like limp arms thrown across a dying body in a half-hearted attempt to preserve what little dignity remained. There was a silence that wrapped around this place, the kind of oppressive quiet that made you instinctively hold your breath. It wasn't just abandonment, it was emptiness. I could almost feel the walls daring me to step forward, to ignore every whispered warning the locals had murmured whenever the doctor's name came up in passing. They said he'd vanished one night without a word, leaving everything behind as though he intended to return. But he never did. I took a step closer, the gravel crunching underfoot, and an image of the doctor began to form in my mind. I imagined an old man with kind eyes that might turn cold when the shadows stretched long in the examination room, a man whose secrets were not easily unearthed. What kind of doctor was he? Was he kind to his patients, or did they leave here with more fears than when they'd arrived? Had they limped out, heads hung low and quiet, or had they run, desperate to escape his presence? A gust of wind nudged the crooked door, and it groaned open slightly, inviting me in with a long, soft creak. My pulse quickened. I'd meant only to look, to see if the rumors held any truth, but now that the door was partially open, there was no going back. The first step over the threshold came with a soft hiss, like something being stirred awake, and I froze, my breath catching. The scent inside was as suffocating as it was strange, damp wood, rot, and something else, something sharp and metallic like rusted iron. It was the smell of decay laced with a hint of desperation, as if the very air was trapped and waiting to be released. My eyes adjusted to the darkness inside, revealing remnants of a life left unfinished. I spotted a tarnished medical table to my left, its leather straps frayed and brittle. A chill crawled up my spine, imagining the countless patients that must have lain there, their fears etched into the walls, their breaths mingling with the damp air of the room. On the floor, an old EKG machine lay tilted on its side, tangled cords snaking across the floorboards like vines desperate to anchor themselves. It was in the silence that I heard it, a faint scratching, like fingernails dragging across wood. It was soft, intermittent, as though someone were struggling to be heard from behind a wall. My heart thudded in my chest as I moved further in, finding myself drawn toward the sound, past broken cabinets and scattered papers. In the far corner, I found it, a door nearly hidden behind a rotting armoire. It was small, almost a closet door, but something about it felt wrong. The scratching grew louder as I approached, as if something inside were waiting for me to open it. A sickening curiosity bloomed in my mind as I reached for the knob, my fingers trembling against the cold metal. Just as I twisted it, the scratching stopped. An unbearable silence swallowed the room, thick and claustrophobic, pressing against me from all sides. My fingers froze, caught between wanting to let go and the horrible, inexplicable urge to see what lay beyond. Then, without warning, the knob jerked in my hand as if something on the other side had taken hold. I yanked my hand away, heart hammering as I stumbled back. But the door did not open. It stayed closed, eerily silent, like a mouth clenched shut to hide secrets better left undisturbed. I backed away, my breath catching as the scratching started again, this time louder, more desperate. It was like a plea, something that made my skin crawl. The words, "Help me," scratched themselves onto the walls of my mind, unspoken but understood. As I turned to leave, a flicker of light caught my eye. On the medical table, something glinted in the pale glow filtering through a crack in the boarded window. I reached out, brushing dust off the surface to reveal a small, leather-bound diary, its cover creased and worn, the initials, HS, stamped in fading gold. I picked it up, hands shaking as I pried it open to a random page, the doctor's slanted handwriting filling each line with an almost frantic energy. The words were cryptic at first, but as I read on, they revealed a mind teetering on the edge of reason. Scrawled on each page were fragments, broken thoughts on darkness and madness, on patients who vanished and others who came back, changed. Before I could turn the page, I heard a whisper, soft and almost gentle, as if someone were standing just over my shoulder. "Are you here for him?" I spun around, but the room was empty, silent except for the faint scratching behind the door. The sound grew louder, and I realized it was moving, coming closer. This house was far from empty. Part 2, Echoes from the Dark. I don't remember moving from the front room to the narrow staircase, but there I stood, clutching the doctor's diary, my breath shallow and quick. The whisper still echoed in my head, each word seeping into my bones like ice. I had to keep going. I had to know what was upstairs. The staircase groaned beneath my weight, the creaks echoing like warnings. With each step, the smell of decay grew stronger, as if something rotten waited at the top, lurking in the dark. I passed framed photographs hanging crookedly along the walls, the faces blurred by dust and neglect. Some showed smiling patients, others empty hospital rooms. But one photo near the top of the stairs made me pause. It was a portrait of the doctor himself, eyes hollow and distant, as if staring straight through the glass and into me. It was like he knew I'd come. When I reached the top, I was greeted by a long, narrow hallway lined with closed doors, each one painted the same sterile white as the walls. The floor was uneven, tilting downward as if the house were sinking into the earth. The silence was oppressive, hanging heavy in the air. I chose a door at random, gripping the tarnished doorknob with a trembling hand. The door opened with a reluctant creak, revealing what had once been a patient's room. Inside was a single metal-framed bed, its mattress yellowed and sagging, and a wooden chair pulled up beside it. The room was empty of any other furnishings, stripped down to its bones, a skeletal reminder of whatever horrors it had once contained. My fingers brushed across the dusty mattress, and I felt a wave of cold spread through me, like an echo of something long gone. I closed the door and moved on, the sense of being watched growing stronger with every step. I reached the end of the hallway, where a larger door loomed, locked with a rusted padlock. The keyhole seemed to stare at me, empty in waiting. Above it, scrawled in dark ink, was a single word, home. I shivered, staring at the word as if it could somehow reveal the house's hidden secrets. I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard a faint, rhythmic sound drifting from behind one of the other doors. It was faint, but unmistakable, the sound of breathing, steady and slow. I told myself it was the house settling, the wind whistling through cracks in the walls, anything but what I knew it truly was. Steeling myself, I approached the door. My hand hovered over the knob as I whispered to myself to leave, to turn around and go back the way I came. But some force drew me to it, a pull I couldn't explain. I twisted the knob, and the door swung open with a reluctant groan. The room beyond was dim, shadows clinging to the walls like stains. My eyes adjusted slowly, revealing a long examination table in the center of the room. Strange apparatuses lined the walls, their designs archaic and twisted, like tools from a medieval torture chamber. Metal gleamed under a thin layer of dust, and dark stains dotted the floor beneath them. Then I saw it. At the far end of the room, a figure stood, half-shrouded in darkness. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by a tattered cloth that draped over its head like a hood. My heart stuttered, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, yet I could feel its presence, cold and suffocating. A voice broke the silence, low and guttural, the words barely more than a whisper. "He never left, you know." I froze, my eyes locked on the figure. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the room with a weight I could feel pressing down on me. The figure's head tilted slightly, as if studying me, waiting for a reaction. My legs trembled, my instinct screaming to run, to flee before whatever was in this house consumed me. But I couldn't move. The house had me ensnared, trapped in its grip. Who never left? I managed to stammer, my voice barely more than a breath. A pause, the silence thick and heavy. "The doctor," the voice whispered. "He's here, waiting." The figure stepped forward, and I stumbled back, my shoulder slamming against the doorframe. The hooded face moved into a sliver of light, revealing empty, sunken eye sockets and a wide, twisted grin carved into pale, waxy skin. My stomach churned as I realized that it wasn't a person at all, but some twisted effigy made of mannequin parts and decayed leather, stitched together in a grotesque imitation of life. A cruel joke, a mockery of the doctor's form. I felt bile rise in my throat, my skin crawling with the urge to escape. I turned and fled the room, slamming the door behind me. My footsteps thundered down the hall, back to the staircase. But as I reached the top step, I stopped short. The path below was blocked. The front door, wide open when I'd arrived, was now shut tight, a faint glow seeping from the cracks around its edges. Panic rose in my chest. I glanced back down the hall, half expecting the twisted figure to be lurking there, waiting to drag me back. But there was nothing, just the empty hallway stretching into shadow. Summoning every ounce of courage, I headed down the stairs, my heart pounding with each step. I gripped the doctor's diary tighter, feeling the weight of its secrets pressing against me. When I reached the door, I yanked it open, ready to flee, but the world beyond had changed. There was no street, no car waiting for me outside. Only darkness. Part 3, The House That Traps the Living. My breath caught as I stared into the abyss outside, a pitch-black nothingness that seemed to devour the light spilling from the doorway. I closed my eyes, hoping I'd wake up, or find myself back on the road outside, with the decrepit house nothing more than a silhouette in the distance. But when I opened them again, I was still there. The house loomed around me, silent and expectant. Slowly, I closed the door and backed away. The darkness outside pressed against the windows, thick and suffocating. I was trapped. The walls seemed to shift around me as I moved, bending inward like a throat ready to swallow me whole. I needed to clear my head, find an anchor, something that would remind me this was all in my imagination. My fingers closed around the diary. Flipping to the next entry, I forced myself to read. The pages were cramped with the doctor's frantic handwriting, the ink smudged and uneven, like he'd written in a fevered rush. It spoke of patients that weren't patients, of shadows that walked and whispered, of something he referred to as the keeper. The further I read, the more the words blurred, each line seeping into the next, spiraling into incoherence until one word was all I could make out, repeated again and again: run. The last page was different. It wasn't a note or a record but a drawing, scratched into the paper with such force the pen had torn through in places. It was a crude sketch of the house, and inside, a figure sat on the floor in the very room I stood in, clutching something, a diary? I shivered, the image hauntingly similar to my own posture. Then my gaze dropped to the bottom of the page, where a final phrase was scrawled in jagged letters. Asterisk, when you're here, you're part of it. Leave, and it comes with you. Asterisk. The floor creaked behind me, and I whirled around, my heart hammering. The door to the hidden room I'd first seen on the ground floor, the one concealed behind the armoire, was now ajar, a faint light glowing from within. As if in a trance, I found myself walking toward it, drawn by the flickering light like a moth to a flame. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air thick with the scent of something burning. Inside the room, I saw an examination table, identical to the one upstairs, but cleaner, its surface polished to a sickening shine. A single lamp hung overhead, swaying slightly, casting a pool of yellow light across the table. My eyes drifted to the walls, where I noticed dark smudges, shapes that looked almost like handprints pressed deep into the plaster. My stomach twisted. They weren't smudges. They were stains, the ghostly remnants of people who'd clawed at the walls, desperate to escape. The door clicked shut behind me. I rushed to turn the knob, but it wouldn't budge. My pulse raced, panic clawing at me. I pounded on the door, calling out into the silence, knowing full well there was no one to hear me. I sank against the door, gasping for breath, my fingers numb and shaking. In the dim light, I caught sight of something beneath the examination table, a small metal box, dented and covered in dust. With trembling hands, I reached out and pulled it into the light. Its surface was scratched and worn, but the initials, HS, were engraved on the lid, just like the diary. I flipped open the latch and lifted the lid, revealing a collection of brittle, yellowed photographs. My stomach churned as I sorted through them, each image more disturbing than the last. They showed the doctor, standing beside people strapped to the very table in front of me, their faces twisted in agony, eyes wide with terror. It was as if he'd preserved their pain in these photos, each image a monument to his twisted experiments. At the bottom of the box was a single piece of paper, covered in the same frantic handwriting as the diary. My eyes skimmed over the words, my heart pounding as I read. Asterisk, I was only supposed to heal them. But they came to me. They told me things, showed me things. Their pain was the only thing that kept it at bay. The keeper, it wants them back. I couldn't save them, but maybe I can save myself. Asterisk. The last line was smeared, barely legible. Asterisk, when it finds someone else, it will finally let me go. Asterisk. I dropped the paper, bile rising in my throat. The doctor hadn't just left his patients behind, he'd sacrificed them, bound them to this house in a desperate attempt to escape something even worse. But if he'd failed, if he'd been trapped here all these years, then where was he now? A soft sound drifted through the room, a whisper that barely reached my ears. It was faint, so faint I could have imagined it. But then it came again, a voice, soft and pleading. Please, help me. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. The whisper grew louder, filling the room, echoing off the walls. It was everywhere, a chorus of voices, each one laced with desperation and fear. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but the voices seeped into my mind, growing louder with every heartbeat. And then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving down the hallway toward the room. I turned, my eyes fixed on the door, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. The footsteps grew closer, a slow, steady rhythm that matched the pounding of my pulse. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall, my hands still clutching the diary. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. There was a pause, a silence so thick I could feel it pressing against my skin. And then, the doorknob began to turn. My breath caught as the door swung open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but my body refused to obey. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, forming a shape, a figure, tall and thin, its face obscured in darkness. And then, in a voice that echoed with a hollow emptiness, it spoke. Welcome home. The words sent a jolt of terror through me, breaking the paralysis that held me. I turned and bolted for the far corner of the room, my hands fumbling along the wall for some kind of exit. But there was nowhere to go, no way out. The figure stepped into the room, moving slowly, deliberately, each step bringing it closer. I felt its presence, cold and unfeeling, like death itself. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a loose panel in the wall. Without thinking, I yanked it open, revealing a narrow crawl space just big enough to squeeze through. I didn't hesitate. I crawled inside, pulling the panel shut behind me, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I pressed myself against the wall. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, a whisper drifted through the darkness, soft and mocking. You can't hide from me. I bit down on my lip, forcing myself to stay silent, to keep my breathing steady. I could hear the figure moving through the room, searching, its footsteps dragging along the floor. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a countdown to the moment it would find me. But then the footsteps stopped, and the room fell silent. I waited, barely daring to breathe, every muscle tense and ready to bolt. But the figure didn't come any closer. After a moment, I realized it was gone, leaving me alone in the suffocating darkness of the crawl space. But as I lay there, trembling and drenched in sweat, a single thought crossed my mind, filling me with a new kind of dread. The keeper wasn't here to haunt the house. It was waiting for someone to take its place. Part 4, The Bargain. The silence in the crawl space wrapped around me like a shroud, thick and absolute, and in that darkness, I became acutely aware of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I couldn't be sure how long I lay there, clutching the diary to my chest as if it were a lifeline. The words from that last page kept replaying in my mind, binding me tighter to this place with each whispered memory. It was a warning, or perhaps an invitation. I could feel the keeper's presence still lingering in the air outside the panel, its oppressive weight sinking into every corner of the house. I tried to shake the thought, but a quiet horror spread through me. The keeper was waiting, watching, biding its time until I made the inevitable mistake that would seal my fate. The weight of the diary in my hand felt heavier, the leather warm and almost pulsing beneath my grip. As I lay in the darkness, the realization gnawed at me. The keeper wasn't something separate from the doctor's actions or from his strange, brutal experiments. It was woven into the house itself, an ancient force feeding off the misery of those who entered. And now, it wanted me to join its collection. But I couldn't stay hidden forever. I had to get out, find an escape, some way out of this nightmare. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to hear anything outside the crawl space. Nothing. Only silence, thick and deadening, wrapped around the house like a curse. I slid the panel open and crawled out, my muscles stiff from crouching in the cramped space. The room was empty, cold, as though no one had stepped inside for years. But I knew better, the keeper was here, waiting somewhere just beyond my sight. I crept toward the door, every nerve on edge as I stepped back into the hallway, glancing both ways down the narrow corridor. Empty. Silent. I slipped down the stairs, my hand grazing the banister to keep my balance as I descended into the darkness below. The air grew colder the further I went, and a faint metallic scent lingered, sharp and acrid. When I reached the ground floor, I hesitated, looking toward the front door. The darkness outside seemed impenetrable, as if it were a void rather than night, a shadow ready to swallow me whole. I'd read enough of the diary to know the house wasn't finished with me yet. No, the keeper wouldn't let me go until I'd made a decision, until I either took the doctor's place, or offered someone else in my stead. But I didn't have anyone to offer, no one to drag into this nightmare with me. Or, did I? A terrible thought took root, seizing me with a twisted hope. If I could lure someone else here, bring them into the house, maybe, just maybe, the keeper would release me. The idea horrified me, sickened me to my core, but the fear of being trapped here forever, of becoming another part of the house, it was too powerful. I had to make a choice. And the keeper knew it. As if reading my thoughts, the house seemed to respond, its walls creaking and groaning, filling the silence with an eager anticipation. I felt its hunger, the emptiness waiting to be filled, and I knew that if I could find someone, anyone to replace me, I might be allowed to leave. But would I be able to live with myself afterward? I stumbled back, my hands clutching the diary as I backed away from the front door. I couldn't do it. I couldn't just hand someone over, leave them to face the same fate that awaited me here. But as the shadows crept closer, suffocating me with their weight, I realized that I had no other option. If I stayed, the keeper would claim me as its own. And no one would ever know what happened to me. My mind raced, and I thought of someone who wouldn't be missed. There was a drifter, a man I'd seen a few times by the edge of town. He was a stranger, nameless, passing through like a ghost. I could lead him here, tell him the house was empty, a shelter for the night. And once he stepped inside, the keeper would take him instead. My conscience wrestled with the thought, a storm of guilt and self-preservation raging inside me. But the house didn't care. The keeper didn't care. All it wanted was a soul to replace mine. The plan solidified in my mind, and a sick, cold determination settled over me. I had to survive. I had to get out of here, whatever the cost. And so, clutching the diary tightly, I made my way to the front door, steeling myself as I reached for the knob. The shadows loomed around me, almost as if they were alive, but I ignored them, focusing on the plan that now consumed my every thought. Just as my fingers touched the doorknob, a voice whispered through the silence. "Is that what you've decided?" I froze, a chill running down my spine as the voice echoed in the empty hall. It was soft, almost gentle, but laced with a dark amusement that made my skin crawl. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the doctor himself standing there, but there was no one. Only shadows, twisting and writhing along the walls. The voice continued, seeping into my mind like poison. You would give him over so easily? A stranger? A man who did you no harm? I clenched my jaw, refusing to respond. The voice chuckled, a low, mocking sound that filled the room with its malevolent glee. It won't be enough, the voice murmured. One soul, one life, it's not enough to quench the keeper's thirst. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. One soul? The thought clawed at my mind, tearing at my sanity. How many lives would it take to satisfy the keeper? How many souls would I have to offer before I was allowed to leave? But the voice didn't answer, only faded into silence, leaving me alone in the dark. The keeper was playing with me, testing me, pushing me to see how far I would go to survive. And I realized, with a sickening clarity, that the only way out was to follow the doctor's path, to give in to the keeper's demands, and to become the very thing I feared. I backed away from the door, the weight of my decision pressing down on me like a vice. If I was going to escape, if I was going to survive, would have to play the keeper's game. I would have to bring others here, lure them into the house, and watch as the keeper devoured them one by one. And with each soul I offered, would sink further into the darkness, until there was nothing left of me but a shadow, bound to this house for all eternity. I clutched the diary to my chest, the words blurring in my mind as the house seemed to close in around me. The walls twisted and warped, the shadows shifting and writhing like living things. And as I stood there, trapped in the keeper's web, I realized that I was already lost. Part 5, The Choice. The weight of my decision settled over me like a shroud, cold and suffocating. As I stared into the darkened halls of the house, I knew that the keeper had already won. It didn't matter what choice I made, the house would never let me go. Still, a sliver of hope lingered, a fragile thread keeping me tethered to some semblance of sanity. I would try. I would try to beat it, to outsmart this twisted place. If I couldn't escape, I'd at least leave this house with my humanity intact. My mind raced with plans, each one more desperate than the last. I thought of leading someone here, a stranger who'd never be missed. But the keeper's mocking words echoed in my mind. One soul is not enough, even if I did bring someone, would it truly set me free, or would the keeper just tighten its grip? Every choice was a trap, each path leading me further into the darkness. Desperate, I turned to the diary again, flipping to the final pages, hoping to find some hidden answer, some key the doctor may have left behind. But the words were more frantic, scrawled with increasing urgency as if he'd been fighting for his own sanity. The entries became shorter, fragmented. Asterisk, the shadows, they know my thoughts. Asterisk. If I am to be free, I must. The words trailed off, his final thoughts descending into incomprehensible scribbles. And then, there was a single phrase, stark against the empty page, asterisk, to the depths. Asterisk. A jolt of understanding coursed through me. The basement. I hadn't dared venture down there, but the doctor's message was clear. If there was any escape, any way to confront the keeper, it was there. The silence of the house thickened as I made my way through the ground floor, my footsteps echoing against the cracked tiles. The basement door loomed ahead, chipped and weathered, its frame buckling as though the wood itself wanted to recoil. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the knob. But if I had any chance of ending this nightmare, it lay beyond that door. I opened it, and a blast of frigid air washed over me, laced with the stench of decay. The staircase descended into darkness, the light above me flickering as if in protest. Each step down felt like an eternity, the silence around me growing heavier until it pressed against my ears, dulling every sound but the steady thud of my heartbeat. The basement was empty, an expanse of concrete walls and cracked floors. The air was thick and oppressive, like something unseen was watching me from every corner. My eyes strained against the shadows, searching for any sign, any clue. And then, in the far corner of the room, I saw it, a door, barely visible in the dim light, half buried beneath layers of dust and grime. Its surface was covered in scratches, deep grooves where something had clawed at the wood, desperate to escape. As I approached, a whisper drifted through the room, low and breathy. "Come closer." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was soft, almost pleading, but laced with an edge of hunger. I forced myself to keep moving, each step heavier than the last as I reached for the door. My hand trembled as I gripped the knob, cold and unyielding beneath my fingers. The door swung open with a reluctant creak, revealing a narrow, winding staircase descending even further into the earth. I swallowed hard, forcing myself down the steps. The air grew colder, more suffocating, as I descended, the darkness thickening until I could barely see a foot in front of me. I reached the bottom, and the space opened into a cavernous room, its walls lined with shelves that sagged under the weight of strange, twisted objects. On the far side of the room stood an altar, a grotesque construction of bone and metal, draped in tattered cloth. Candles flickered around its base, casting an eerie glow over the symbols carved into the stone floor, a spiral of marks that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. And there, standing before the altar, was a figure. The doctor. Or rather, what was left of him. His form was twisted and gaunt, his skin stretched tight over bones that jutted out at unnatural angles. His eyes were hollow, empty sockets that seemed to drink in the darkness around them. He looked up as I approached, a twisted grin spreading across his face, revealing teeth sharp and broken. "You've come," he rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. My hands shook, but I forced myself to keep my gaze steady. You're the doctor." He laughed, a dry, rattling sound that echoed through the room. "I was once. But now, I am simply the keeper's servant." A chill ran through me. "You did all of this. The patients, the experiments, you're the reason the house is like this." The grin faded, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in his empty eyes, regret, perhaps, or despair. "I didn't want this. But the keeper, it demands sacrifice. Pain. Souls to feed its endless hunger. I tried to leave, but it would not let me. So, I became what it needed. I gave it everything." He took a step toward me, his twisted hands reaching out. "But now, it wants someone new. Someone stronger. Someone willing to do what I could not. You must take my place." I stumbled back, shaking my head. "No. I'm not like you. I'm not going to hurt anyone." His hollow laugh echoed in the darkness. "You think you have a choice? The keeper will consume you, one way or another. You will become part of this place, bound to its will, unless you embrace it. Unless you feed its hunger." I shook my head, backing away. "There has to be another way." He tilted his head, his gaze piercing through me. "The keeper is a parasite. It feeds on those who step into its domain. But it can be sated. It can be bound, if you offer it enough." I felt a glimmer of hope, a desperate, fragile spark. "How? How can I bind it?" His grin widened, his voice a low whisper. "A life for a life. An endless cycle. Offer it what it craves, and it will bind itself to you. You will become its master, its jailer, or its prisoner. The choice is yours." I took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling over me. A life for a life. The keeper would take me, but if I bound it, if I took control, perhaps I could end this nightmare. I turned to face the altar, the symbols swirling before me, twisting and writhing like living things. The doctor's voice echoed in my mind, a haunting whisper. "Sacrifice, surrender, embrace the darkness." With trembling hands, I reached for the candles, their flames flickering as if in anticipation. The shadows around me thickened, pressing in, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and then, in a single, swift motion, I blew out the candles. The room plunged into darkness, an endless void that swallowed everything. I felt the keeper's presence surge around me, filling the space, its hunger raw and insatiable. But I held my ground, my mind focused on a single thought: I am not yours. The darkness writhed, twisting around me like a living thing, trying to burrow into my mind, to consume me. But I fought back, clinging to that single thread of defiance, refusing to yield. And then, in the silence, I spoke the words that had been etched into my mind. I bind you to this place. I am your jailer, your keeper. You will feed on no one else. You will obey me. For a moment, the darkness hesitated, as if testing my resolve. And then, slowly, it began to recede, sinking back into the shadows, leaving me standing alone in the empty room. The silence was absolute, a void where the keeper's presence had once been. I staggered back, my body trembling with exhaustion, the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. I had bound the keeper, taken control of its hunger, its power. But at what cost? As I made my way back up the stairs, the house felt different. Empty. Hollow. The keeper was still here, lurking in the shadows, but its power was mine to command. And as I stepped through the front door, into the first light of dawn, I knew that I would never truly be free. The house had let me go, but the darkness had taken root in my soul, binding me to its will. I was free, but I was no longer myself. I was the new keeper. End of story.